Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville. I'm Al Hunt. Thanks for joining us. This week we are joined by Deb Fallows and Jim Fallows, Jeanne Jordan, and Steve Asher to talk about a wonderful documentary called Our Towns. And remember, we take your questions each episode, so write to politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. We'll get to as many as we can, and don't forget, you gotta tell us where you're from. This episode is sponsored by our favorite cereal, Magic Spoon. Please check out their links in the show notes. We thank you for supporting our sponsors like Magic Spoon. It really helps make this podcast happen. Please tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. James Carville, we have some great guests on this week. We do most weeks, but these are, really special. But let's talk a little bit about, I watched the highlights, at least, in some of the real time, the Chauvin trial, the Minneapolis cop who is accused of murdering George Floyd. And I thought the prosecution put on a powerful case. The videos tell the story, of course. To keep your knee on a handcuffed man on the ground, on his throat for more than 9 minutes is just barbaric. They had strong witnesses. The defense did all it could to paint Floyd as some kind of a druggie with a bad heart condition, and maybe that's what happened. But I thought their case was much weaker, and their witnesses weren't nearly as impressive that they brought in on Wednesday as the others. But, you never bet on a jury. There's 12 people. You don't have any idea what will happen. And I think there's a great deal of nervousness about this verdict, because if it goes, the right wing and some in the media are praying for an acquittal or a hung trial because it'll cause all kinds of mayhem. I think the case is pretty darn powerful. But what do you think?
Well, there are two things, I think. One is that the charge that the jury is going to get for what it takes to find the defense that the police officers have under Minnesota law is going to be startling to people when the judge reads the jury. It's not just they have defenses that you and I would not have. And so that worries people. However, at the end of the day, the videotape is just powerful. And it's just a powerful piece of evidence. If it wouldn't have been for that video evidence that Darnella, that young woman, 17-year-old, I guess a girl if you're 17, I don't know, I'm going to get in trouble with the PC police here.
Don't go there, James.
I know, just whatever, just female that
Good.
that recorded it. But for that, Chauvin would probably walk. I mean, there would be enough confusion about what you saw and everything else. I don't know, but that young female, I think at the end of the day, they're probably going to find some responsibility on the part of this police officer. But for her, that would not have happened.
And is there the people you talk to, is it more probable second-degree murder or manslaughter? If they do find the guilty verdict.
I think no one knows.
No one knows. Okay.
Okay. I mean, that's the people that I talk to who are very knowledgeable, think that the Minnesota law is pretty protective police, but that the video it seems that though the prosecution is highly competent, the judge is experienced. All right, there's going into it. There's a competent prosecutor. There's an experienced jurist that's running the trial. It's the best you can hope for.
It is.
Yeah,
I agree. The larger context. A black man was killed nearby Brooklyn Center in Minnesota, where the police officer said that he thought he was shooting him with a
I think
taser.
The police officer is she.
It's unimaginable that you would think you were shooting someone with a taser and you kill them with a gun. There was that terrible video in Virginia of this Army officer who was pulled over by a thug and threatened by a thug cop while he was wearing the uniform of his country. I have a couple of thoughts. I think that, first of all, I think most cops are good. I really think most cops do a good job. And I think when people like Congresswoman Tlaib of Detroit said, let's get rid of the police force, I mean, that's the dumbest goddamn thing in the world. Who the hell is going to protect people without that? However, saying all that, we have more than just an anecdotal or a singular problem here and there. There is a systemic problem. And some police forces are dealing with it very well, some not so well, but it tends to be the bigger ones where there's been a tension. And one of the problems, James, we've talked about this before, in a place like Minneapolis, is the police union. And you got to figure out a way around that. And I tend to be very supportive of unions.
Yes. And you know, but there's nothing that has been more politically destructive, in my opinion, in modern American political history than defund the police.
That's
right.
Yep.
And if
other than maybe eliminate the police.
Yeah. Well, then we that's right.
Yeah,
then we not, that was just not where people were, and so that we just doubled down on a bet. There's one congresswoman from Detroit, I guess it is. It is, and it's right that the United States has got to, and I'm sure that Merrick Garland is on the front burner. We got to rethink policing and police training, police screening. All right, some of these things can be caught, can be nipped early, and usually these people have social posts or something that there needs to be. My opinion is we should pay them more and have more exacting recruiting and training, because I think that is where some of this falls down. I don't know how you can be trained, be an experienced police officer, and not know the difference between a taser and a 38. I mean, it's kind of. I mean, I've held a lot of pistols in my hand. You kind of know what it is. I don't think, it just doesn't make any sense that she would intentionally shot him, because she was yelling taser, 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 and then after she had shot the guy, she's like, "Oh my God, I shot him." I don't know, but somebody needs to review this entire thing, particularly the training that these people go through. But Jesus, and that event in Virginia, it almost, I couldn't look at it.
Oh,
I'm like, oh man, come on, you're not doing this, are you? And the guy said, I'm scared to get out of this car. And the fat cop says you got good reason to be scared. I mean, what world do they live in?
Well, he was rightfully dismissed, as he should have been fired. But you're right. It's just
what I wish someone would do is do a story on how he got hired, or how the police woman in Brooklyn, Minnesota, how were they hired? How were they trained? What can we do short of ending policing, which we're not going to do, nor should we do? What can we do to cut down on the number of incidences here? And you got to go back and revisit it. You got to find out where's the glitch, where's the flaw. If something is fundamentally wrong with the way that we recruit and train a lot of policemen in this country.
You know, one of the things, this applies, is more relevant for larger cities, to be sure. One of the things, I think you get better policing as a general proposition when the police live in the community. I think when they don't live in the community, they don't have the same stake. There have been a number of studies that have demonstrated that. Now, in some places, you can't be rigid about that. But, you know, it makes a difference. But there are places that are working on things like that. The LA Police Department, they've had a couple problems this year, but they have made major reforms. That used to be the most brutal police department in America. And they certainly have made great progress. So things can be done, but you have to have a comprehensive and a...
What was the name of that Pitt law professor that was so good?
Oh, God, he was good.
Ago. Maybe we need to revisit him, because he's an expert, and he's the foremost expert on policing, because it's clear that we have to have police. It is clear that we got to do better than we're doing.
That's
just clear to anybody. I don't care where you are on the maybe if you're extreme political spectrum, you're not like that. But to me, it's clear. And I know I've had some experience with, it was starting to think with the New Orleans Police Department, did you have to live in the city? Well, you just eliminate a lot of people. You can't tell a guy making $36,000 a year, they got to move. I mean, that's
you can't. But I think when you start recruit people, you want to recruit more people who live in the community. I think there's studies that
indicate. Let me tell you what a big problem is. Let me clue you in on something.
Yeah,
it's hard to find people to pass the drug test.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, you got a systemic problem. But there's no question. Study after study shows that if
recruiter, what's the biggest issue?
If you have a stake in a community, you care more about it. It's just that's just common sense. Let's quickly take up one more subject. The New York Times had a story last Sunday. Both of us, when we started to read it, thought, "What the hell are they doing this for?" It's about a San Clemente school teacher who is by all accounts, very good teacher. Fourth grade there, and her husband is a big QAnon follower. She follows her husband. They were January 6th at the Capitol. I don't think they went to the Capitol, but there for the demonstration. And the whole question is, should she be dismissed or not?
Yeah, also, there's the mask issue.
There is the mask issue, which does make it more
but there's
more
no
vexing.
All right. So here's the question.
Let's just explain. The mask issue is there was a public event where she went and she chastised people for wearing a mask.
Right. So here we have someone whose husband is involved in lunatic pursuits that she supports, or she shows up at events with her husband and whatever, all right? She screamed at people for not marrying. The one thing that is absent is any complaint about her performance in the workplace. If you read the article, now maybe there was, but it says there was, everybody kind of admitted that she was a good teacher, didn't promote any of this kind of crap in the classroom.
Right.
Should you fire someone on something that is unrelated to their professional behavior? Obviously, there's some things that just companies or school boards are going to just say is just unacceptable. All right. No one would say if somebody used the N-word. Say, well, I never used that in the classroom. But that's not going to work. You can't have to fire that person. I just think I was intrigued by it because I had this, I talked to you about it. I've talked to 10 other people. And when 10 people say the same thing, I'd urge our listeners to read the article. Because it's not clear one way or the other what the right choice.
And it's a superbly reported article, and
right.
It's a difficult choice. I agree with what you said earlier. The one thing I would say, hey, you don't fire her. There's nothing in the classroom. She's married to a nutbag. So what?
James Carville's hardly one to criticize one's spouse.
Mary and Judy will say that can't be a disqualifier. However, when she does at a public event go and create a bit of a ruckus over people, apparently including kids wearing a mask, that gives me problems, and I'm not sure what you do about it. I'm not, I still think it's difficult, but it's a good story. Everybody ought to read it. New York Times, last Sunday.
Yeah, your reaction will be, why is the New York Times covering this, a school teacher in San Clemente? And when you get to about graph 3, you go, oh, okay. And then, but by the time you get to graph 7, you totally enmeshed in the story, which makes a good story. You didn't see it coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, James. Deb and Jim Fallows, among the great journalists of our age, traveled around America for 4 years in their small plane. They spent time in different towns, and they wrote a great book about the spirit and resilience of many of these communities, which we discussed with them several months ago. This week, working with filmmakers Jeanne Jordan and Steve Asher, it premiered as an HBO documentary, Our Towns. And anybody out there who hasn't watched Our Towns on HBO, you ought to, because it's just a great story. We welcome all 4 of you. Just to make it easier, let me just say the towns in the film are Redlands in San Bernardino, California, Bend, Oregon, Eastport, Maine, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Charleston, West Virginia, and Columbus, Mississippi. There, that wasn't that hard. Deb, let me start with you. Every day in Washington, we wake up and it revolves around warring political camps, and I'm sure there are political discussions in Bend and in Columbus and in Charleston. But what you found, that wasn't much of a focus. It was really on what they're doing to make things work and make things succeed. Is that fair? And if so, why?
I think that's fair. And maybe part of the answer is what goes on in Washington, D.C., where we live, is that's the business of the town. And it kind of overlays everything else that's going on the local level. You can't walk into the Safeway and start one conversation without ending up on what's happening in immigration or what's happening on the border or something that turns very quickly political. But in small towns, I'm sure these conversations go on too. But there is there's not the same kind of preoccupation with them as there is such a preoccupation in Washington D.C. I mean, you're thinking about more of the potholes in the roads, or that this school isn't working, or that why what can we do about not climate change, but what can we do about the farms that aren't getting enough water? How can we help these farmers because they're getting depressed? It goes to the compelling everydayness of what we might frame as grand political topics, but takes them down to a level of what you're doing in your hometown, where you can actually have an effect and have some agency.
Jeanne, when you joined the Fallows for these trips, what struck you about some of these towns? Is there one or two that really stood out, or one or two themes that you think were most dominant? Was most dominant?
Well, I think one of the things that is important to know is that I grew up on a farm near a small town in Iowa. So there was a certain way that I felt like I kind of knew what we might find. However, I really was surprised by how enthusiastic all these towns were about themselves. They all thought they were the best kept secret, and I guess I didn't quite expect that. Anyway, following Jim and Deb's example, we just went into these towns wide open, and the one thing we didn't really want to do is talk politics, and nobody ever brought it up, which was a fascinating, wonderful thing at the time we were doing it.
Jim, we read stories every day about towns that were once prosperous, many of them in your wife's home state, that now are in deep trouble. Almost every one of these 6 communities and towns that you wrote about had problems, had economic difficulties, and yet they all have either are back or they're more resilient. I mean, even a place like Charleston that's lost half its population. Describe that.
So I think almost any place you go in the U.S., you can't find a town or a region that hasn't been through some kind of problem at some point. In the places we visited, Bend, Oregon, almost nobody knows this now, but 30 or 35 years ago, that was the most depressed place in the country when the timber industry sort of went away all of a sudden in the 1980s. In Charleston, its troubles are famous, and Eastport, Maine has been through repeated booms and busts. San Bernardino, California, right near where I grew up, has gone through all sorts of hardships. And I think the theme that was in common that we were trying to get across is the story of almost every place in the U.S., and the story of the U.S. as a whole, is of struggle. And the question is whether places can find a new footing, whether they can use their resources, their awareness of what they have to offer, their awareness of their place in the country, their awareness of the particular options that are open to them. And I think that's what we wanted to portray. And I think it's significant we had towns along different paths of the journey. Charleston, West Virginia has been hard hit in a lot of ways, as you say, but they're finding lots of ways to try to rebuild themselves. Bend, by contrast, is about 20 years along that path. And we're trying to say, if things start going more favorably, what are you dealing with then? If you start having affordable housing issues, et cetera. But so our story is, America is a pageant of struggle, and here are people in the middle of the struggle.
Steve, when you do a film, which you know better certainly than I do, you have to make it more interesting. Sometimes a book doesn't lend itself to that. This really does follow the book. I mean, I'm sure there are things you had to do that were different. You interviewed people, you had scenes, but I read the book several years ago, and I different towns, there were some different communities, but did that surprise you?
Well, actually, I would say that we didn't actually set out to remake the book. We saw what the Fallows did as this kind of ongoing process, that it had started with Jim's initial blog post that became the America Futures series on the Atlantic website, which became a book. And then when we set out to make the film, it was to kind of leverage the ideas of exploring these towns, looking at the tension between the problems and the solutions, but also recasting it with almost all new stories. We needed to film things that were ongoing at the time. And also, films, there's a different motor that drives films than drives, written prose. We knew that we needed a certain amount of, capturing the physical landscape and the human landscape, and also, a certain kind of emotional connection between the audience and the stories that had to be really vivid. So, film and prose are different animals, and so we really kind of set out to do the filmmakerly things that we do that are different than writing a book.
James Carville.
So I've lived in America that you wrote a film about till 1988. Then I lived in Northwest Washington, Old Town Alexandria, from 1988 to 2008. Then I went back. And there is a sense, and I've found it since I've moved back home. Did y'all pick up a sense that people feel like, for lack of a better word, is the media East Coast complex doesn't understand their lives? Did you have to deal with this? That you feel kind of looked down on? And I'm a liberal, okay? I'm not anything like that, but I get the feeling myself.
James, yes, I'll start out. And I have, in the early part of the film, I have what my sons tease me about a little bit, but it's actually true, my own sort of log cabin story of growing up in a part of California that coastal California looks down on. It's the inland California. It's where people came during the Great Depression, and it's where people came from Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. It's not a stylish part of California. And I'll just tell briefly, when I was in high school, Joan Didion wrote one of her first most famous magazine articles about my hometown. And essentially it was about, can you imagine these hicks? These people, this is sort of the kind of the California we don't talk about. And so I think one very, very important theme that goes through the entire movie is how deep and complex and sophisticated people around the country are when you ask them about their lives. We have wonderful, eloquent statements from Larry Gross, who's put a very successful music host in Charleston, West Virginia, and also Chris Gardner, who's a jack of all trades in Eastport, Maine, talking about how people think when you hear the word West Virginia, the name West Virginia, or you hear rural Maine, or you hear Mississippi, you have a whole set of assumptions. And they are here to tell you there is so much more going on there. And I think that's probably the most important thing about the movie, apart from its beauty. And as Al was being too polite to say, it's so much more interesting than the book, is just the kind of depth and sophistication, and not just 3-dimensionality, but 10-dimensionality of people around the country that isn't captured by guy in a diner stories that you usually get after an election.
And the fact of the matter is, people in cities can be as parochial as people out in the country, and a lot of the people out in the country were more sophisticated than a lot of city people we know. So, I mean, I think it's also plays into the whole question of, like, a lot of people still have trouble with the idea that we didn't address partisan politics more, and that's another way of kind of overlaying the cliches of a media elite looking at small towns and like, well, who did you vote for? Because that's really all we're interested in about you is how do you vote? And that's why we didn't ask that question, and why the Fallows started by not asking that question.
Yeah.
Also, I just want to say to James
Sure.
what you said about people looking down. Because I grew up where I grew up in Iowa, I know for a fact that people have a certain attitude about farmers. My family were farmers, and we actually made a film. Basically, part of me feels like I just made it. I wanted to just like hit that cliche out of the park. And when people would watch the film, they would say, "Your family is so smart," which was just like a perfect meat, to just like go after them, sort of, because truthfully, there is a national attitude.
They were smart, and they didn't live anywhere near water. And how is that possible?
Right.
If you did a thing, I guess Columbus was that Starkville area, and I'm just telling you, the mentality of people in Washington is if you go to Mississippi State, it's too bad you didn't go to MIT. They don't give a shit that they're not at MIT. They're quite happy being at Mississippi State.
Right.
And quite proud of what they're doing. And I don't think we acknowledge that kind of stuff enough. I'll say we. But I think what the glory of the film in the book is that these people don't aspire to be you. They're very content in making their lives as well as they can where they are.
That's really interesting. And it also is something that we heard from the young people, the acclaimed young people in all these towns that we visited, these really smart high school kids who wanted to get away to learn stuff, but so frequently came into their conversation. The next part was, because I'm going to bring that back here, and I want to open this kind of business or do this kind of research at East Mississippi State, or I want to. The point was, I want to come home. I want to go away for a while, but my intention is to come back here. So it's not just I am happy within the limits of where I live. It's I am happy to be part of what lifts up this place when I grow up, which is a statement.
That's also been a really interesting thing about the pandemic is now you can live pretty much anywhere and do all sorts of work that's completely elsewhere. And it suddenly reinfuses the idea that you could live where you want to live and still not be limited in your job opportunities to that area. So that's like the pandemic has kind of inverted a lot of the messaging of the film.
Yeah. I want to turn it back over to Al, just because this touches me in many ways. But the real way it touched me when I moved back to Louisiana in 2008, people saying, "Well, what's he up to? This is some kind of move. He's going to run for governor." He said, "I just wanted to go home." All right? I like the idea that anybody walks out of Washington, not in handcuffs, a pine box, can't be digested. What are you up to, James? What's your agenda? I want to go home. All right, I'm fine. I live in a 8,000 square foot house. I got 25 plus restaurants within a half a mile of me. What's wrong with my life? And I just got to experience that on a level. It was kind of funny the way that you guys have come to understand or understood the rest of the country. Me having lived this, I so identify with what you did. But anyway, I'll turn it back over to Al.
So can I just horn in here before Al? So what you say, James, resonates so powerfully with us on a general point and a specific one. The general point is we always talk about America being homogenized and rootless and all the same, et cetera. But the sense of where people are from is really strong. We saw so many cases of people who, like you, they were from someplace and they wanted to go back there. We're thinking about ways to be back in the Pacific Northwest or in Texas or in Virginia or Florida or you name it. The other is that my own hometown in Redlands, California, where I always think I am from, it's been transformed by having a multi-billion-dollar tech firm that is located there and not Cambridge, Mass, and not in Seattle. because the people who founded it, who were childhood friends of mine, that's where they're from. And they wanted to build that firm there and attract people and transform their towns. So we understand what you're talking about.
And he said, you interviewed him, and he said the quality of life is better here. The people can afford to live here better. That's important. There's some wonderful, really quite moving stories, but you also capture that there are problems there, as everywhere. The opioid problem is pervasive, and not just Charleston, but all over. And there's these towns they're facing up to it. By and large, they're addressing this sometimes in some quite innovative ways. Anybody, Jeanne, Deb, anybody?
Well, problems, a lot of people talk about, this film, is it optimistic or is it Pollyannish? We went into it feeling like the problems are as important as the solutions. And some of these problems are homelessness, opioids are intractable. They're chipping away at them. They're not solving them. You're not going to solve racism. But it was really interesting to see how they're throwing themselves at those problems. And, it's that struggle, it's that tension that makes the whole story interesting.
Yeah, I there were so many people that I just found fascinating in the film. And a lot of them could have been from another town. Two who could not have been from any other town were Edward French and his wife, Laura Whalen. I mean, they are so down East Maine. But they run a wonderful little newspaper up there, Jim. I think it's twice a month, the Quaddy Times. And you had I thought, a great interview that every journalist, or every publisher in America should watch.
It was wonderful to meet the French brothers and their spouses, Hugh and Edward French. And Edward and Laura Whalen run the Quaddy Tides, which their mother founded back in the 1960s. And its sort of guiding spirit is you build circulation by offering more rather than less. And they have a network in this little tiny town of sort of 20 volunteer and part-time correspondents all around down East Maine and that part of Canada. And the paper is just fat. It's a fat print paper twice a month. And he was saying that the way in which you build, number one, they both were saying that communities need a news source, ideally a paper, to hold them together. The other is that papers need to expand rather than contract to be able to have a future.
We saw.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Deb.
I was going to pile on to a similar another journalism story that wasn't in the movie and wasn't in the book, but we heard about this year in South Dakota, where one of the local papers was going belly up. They couldn't make it anymore. And then the reason was that the building in which they were housed was being sold by the owner. He owned the building and he owned the newspaper. He was going to just shut down the newspaper and sell the building. Well, people in 3 of the neighboring towns got together and decided to buy the building. And the owner said, okay, well, I'll just throw in the newspaper as well. So they restarted a local newspaper with all volunteer work in this building. And now it's become this kind of thriving regional paper. But it's, it takes a lot. On one hand, it's easy to kill a paper. On the other hand, if people want that, it's hard to kill the paper.
Boy, that's great. We hear every day, we read about immigration in this country. I think the stereotype is it's down at the border, it's a problem, it's the Southwest, maybe Florida. Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Could it exist without immigrants today?
Yeah, boy, sure. Not the same way. That is for sure.
So Steve and Jeanne, why don't you tell us about that? Because that was such a part of the town.
Absolutely. But the thing that amazed me is that when I was growing up, my dad took hogs to Sioux Falls to sell them. And at that point in time, Sioux Falls was not a place that immigrants came to. The thing that changed that was the Vietnam War, and it really all over the Midwest, people took in refugees from Vietnam, and then it's just continued. But Sioux Falls kind of wrote the book. The Lutheran Church in South Dakota sort of got a hold of this issue, and they have it's like almost an industry of helping people come into the country, get used to what needs to happen here, taking them to doctor's appointments, helping them find places to live, helping them get over the fact that they've moved to a place that it's going to snow a lot. If you're from Eritrea, you're not used to snow, but they help people in a way that I think it was just such a find. At least for me,
Yeah.
it was a big surprise.
And then during COVID, you know, the meatpacking plants were deemed essential industries. A lot of mostly immigrants work there. Native-born Americans don't want to work in the packing plants. There was no PPE in the beginning. It was a huge COVID hotspot. Because meat was essential, they had to go to work. So it really, the whole country was kind of pivoting on immigrant and refugee labor that really wasn't being treated very well.
I love it. I think his name was Muhammad Ahmed, who said, "I'm a forfer. I'm a refugee. I'm a black. I'm a Muslim, and I'm from Somalia." James.
So I want to get each one of you, because you're thoughtful people, you come from different backgrounds, and this has been gnawing at me for a while. I think democratic messaging comes out of the faculty lounge of the linguistics department at Brown. Okay? Have you ever met anybody that lived in a community of color? Have you ever met a Latinx person out there? They don't exist.
Yeah.
All right? They live in neighborhoods.
Yeah.
All right? And who comes up with this? And then it gets, and you say, well, James, it's mouthed on cable TV. It's everywhere that you go in the culture. People are saying we've got to unite communities of color and the Latinx, but this, and you talk to people, I don't know what shit you're talking about.
Okay, first of all,
I just get my reaction, because this is just a thing that I'm on the linguistics department at Brown is ruining the goddamn country.
No, you're maligning the wrong people here.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
So Deb is a
don't mind
linguistics. So Deb is a linguistics PhD, but from the University of Texas.
yeah.
Right.
So
The People's Republic of Austria.
So the discipline has, decades ago it morphed. It used to be that language was prescriptive. There was a way to say it, and that's how you could say it. And if you said it with the wrong ending, that was wrong. But linguists are actually the first ones now who are listening to what people say. And if it changes, like nobody says, I'm going to go lie down now. Everybody's going to go lay down now, which is, of course, wrong. But linguists don't say that's wrong anymore. They say language is changing. We have to accept that language changes, and that's how it works. So point one, it's not the linguists. The linguists are just kind of following along what's happening.
Okay, let's say the sociology department.
Okay, the sociology department. Well, that's a different story. And I'm going to blame the media on this one more than the linguists, because somebody with who's a quote influencer will come in and start talking in a gravelly voice or drop things at the end of the sentence. And then since they're influential, other people pick it up and it goes like wildfire because it has a national audience. It used to kind of, dribble and drab around the country in a slower way, but now you've got everybody listening to the same influential people. And if there's something behind it, or if you feel like you're not being old-term politically correct, then you're going to have to say that too eventually. Otherwise, you'll get some new label. So it's easy for things to be national now, like people of color. And if you don't like it, you got to find another way around it. Yeah.
Stephen, Jeanne, you didn't go to Brown, I hope, did you?
No. University of Iowa.
This is a ground-free environment here, I think. Although we have nieces and nephews who went there, and so in addition to defending linguists in general, my own beloved wife as a linguistics person, James, I agree with you that anything that smacks of talking down to people is poison, and so that there is, because people are smart, and so I think there'll be voices coming out of the whole breadth of America that don't have any talking down implication to them.
Right. think the English is a good language. I was watching the Hemingway thing at Ken Burns, and I knew who he was, and that kind of stuff. God, I mean, simplicity in sentences was, and Gertrude Stein used to just like beat the crap out of him, but there's something in the utility of communications that is worth emulating.
Did you see when he was at the Kansas City Star?
Yes.
Did you see the little credo of how you were supposed to write?
Right.
Style sheet.
The style sheet?
Yes.
It was the way he wrote for the rest of his life.
No
it was
adjectives.
like, wow, that's where he learned it.
Right.
No
like no
one,
adjectives.
no one would ever confuse me with Ernest Hemingway, but I was taught in the beginning, short sentences and no more than 2 sentences to a paragraph. Transition, move quickly. And I was teaching a course at the University of Pennsylvania about how to write an op-ed. And some student said to me, well, I read a Henry Kissinger op-ed last weekend, and it had 10 sentences in one paragraph. And I said, what did it say? She said, I don't have any idea what it said. Anyway, you all have done just a masterful
I
job.
love this.
It's
By
just-
the way, Deb, my daughter is starting the MFA program in creative writing at LSU, and her project is going to be reporting on the leprosy colony that used to exist in Carville, Louisiana. And she's going and doing all the original research and has got the museum curator. Wow. And she's very precise about language. She's very
interesting.
Interested in that kind of stuff.
Yay for her.
Congratulations to all 4 of you. This collaboration really worked. And anybody,
Sure did.
anybody who has not seen Our Town's HBO, you got to watch it and maybe rewatch. I've watched it 3 times. Sooner or later, Deb, I'll get it. But anyway, no, I appreciate your time, and it's just you did a magnificent job. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey, James, we're all trying to eat better, but healthy breakfast doesn't have to be boring. Magic Spoon has the amazing flavors you love without all the bad stuff. 0 grams of sugar, 14 grams of protein, only 4 net grams of carbs. It's just 140 calories a serving. We've been getting letters from listeners saying, hey, thanks for telling us about this Magic Spoon. They just love it. And some exciting news. Magic Spoon is relaunching the blueberry favorite. One of your favorite flavors is now back in stock after being sold out. Are you a blueberry fan, James?
Yeah, I like blueberry fine. What I like about this product is it proves one of my great maxims of life is wrong. And one of my great life things, if you did a chart, a matrix, and you put tastes good, good for you, right? The better it tastes, the worse it is for you. That's why we love a French fry or fried oyster, okay? Because on the taste scale, they're very high. On the good for you scale, they're very low. And that rule applies in a whole lot of instances. This is one that proves it wrong. This actually scores very high on the taste scale, and it scores very high on the good for you scale, maybe better than anything else. I'm very partial to citrus, and it's very high on the taste scale, and it's very high on the good for you scale. This is where this product lands you. It usually the stuff you get that you go to health food stores and stuff, and it tastes like cardboard. It really does. But this stuff is actually good for you, and it's just a good snack.
It is, and you have so many options. You can build your own box using cocoa, fruity frosted, peanut butter, God, I love that peanut butter, and cinnamon to create your custom bundle to perfectly match your taste. It's catching on the world over, so if you're listening from Canada, Magic Spoon now ships there. We just can't get over how good all the flavors are, and neither can my grandson. He happens to love blueberry, and he loves the cocoa, and he sometimes mixes the cocoa with peanut butter. It tastes exactly like a peanut butter cup. It's delicious. As James said, it's super healthy, and that really brings joy to your day. Right, James?
Absolutely. And the people mix, look, they're great winemakers. They mix Cabernet and, Cabernet Franc or Merlot or whatever else. They blend all this together. You can, just like great wines, you can blend these cereals together, and it give you a different taste profile in one scoop in your mouth.
I've never tried to eat cereal with wine. Maybe we'll think about it.
Well, I'm just making a point that you're blending, what your grandson is doing is something that he'll learn that people do is they Great wines are very often blend and not single varietal. And so you can try different flavors, you can try different things and do cinnamon and peanut butter and jelly and together. Why not? You get more stuff going on in your mouth.
Well, go to magicspoon.com/war room to grab some blueberry or custom bundle of cereal to try it today. And be sure use our promo code War Room at checkout to save $5 off your order. The offer now is good anywhere in the U.S. or Canada, where, as I say, they're now selling Magic Spoon, but only when you use our code at checkout. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. James, what that means is, if you don't like it for any reason, I can't imagine why you wouldn't, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember, get your next delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/warroom and use the code warroom to save $5 off. Thank you, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring this episode. All right, James, our question and answers. We provide the answers, we hope, because they provide darn good questions. We've got great listeners out there. Melanie in Bellingham, Washington. She says, I really want to make a difference in the 2022 midterm elections. I'm so worried the Republicans are going to take back the House without much effort. Where can small donors go? This kind of question has been asked before, but they keep asking it. They want to make a difference. They want to stay energized. What do you tell them?
Well, I would probably, if I was a small donor, I would send the money to the Democratic Campaign Congressional Committee, the DCCC. Why do I say that? Because they supplement the campaigns. They have better targeting than you have. They're better equipped, although they screwed up in 2020. I would tell any donor that the DCCC is probably, or if you really want to do the research and you want to go to someone who's in a vulnerable swing district, then send a check directly to them. If you can take 10 minutes and figure it out. But be judicious with your contributions. I mean, when I think of all of the money that was sent to Amy McGrath in Kentucky, which everyone knew she didn't have a chance. It's already $30 million. I mean, donors have got to be smarter and more targeted about where they spend their money. Now, what turned out to be justifiable, huge expenditure was the Georgia. That was a really good use of a lot of money. And so I would like, if I didn't want to do my homework, I'd send my check to the DCCC. If I wanted to spend 15 minutes, and it's not very difficult, to find a Democrat who won by less than 1.5% or 2% in 2020, or a district where a Republican won by 1.5% or 2%, and find a good Democratic opponent. That's my advice.
Yeah, and you know a lot more about this than I do, but if you're looking for the Senate races out there, Melanie, I mean, it's clear. It's Wisconsin, it's Pennsylvania, it's North Carolina, it's Georgia, and then if Republicans make an effort, serious effort in either like a Nevada, New Hampshire. So that's easy.
New Hampshire.
Yeah, there's no, well, that depends on whether the governor runs, right. I think.
It'd be close anyway, but
right.
New Hampshire would be
anyway. The next, we have Ismail in Irving, Texas, who said he's really worried that people are being tricked into thinking things are really bad by Republicans, similar to how many people voted against were against Obamacare. So they voted for Trump, and then they found out that health care was their ACA all along. Should the Democrats be taking more credit? I think Obama his administration made a big mistake on both their stimulus and the Affordable Health Care Act. They got so involved in the inside game, and they did very well. They passed them. They were incredibly important pieces of legislation. They forgot about the outside game. That stimulus saved us from a worldwide depression, conceivably, and yet it was unpopular all the way through the next midterm elections. I think the Biden people are doing a bit of a better job. They're talking about what they're doing. They have a message that's more consistent. They're not just worried about an inside game. That is really critical.
If I think of Obama, first of all, as a politician, let's start with the obvious. He is the first person since Eisenhower to get 50% twice, I think. Right? he never liked politics. I mean, he liked governing. He was. That's not a. It's not a value statement. It's just he didn't. I don't know if he thought it was unseemly. And Biden, every fiber of him is political. And I don't think policy distinctions between the two are particularly great, but the stylistic differences are pretty obvious. And you're right, and he didn't. But of course, he had a disastrous 2010. Clinton had a disastrous 94. To be fair, he had a disastrous 2014. He had a very successful 8 and 12. So he's a very. There's a lot more we're going to learn about Obama as historians keep unearthing stuff, and I think a lot of it is going to. I think it's going to be interesting and compelling. But he didn't. He'd rather be in a meeting, about policy than.
Well, we can talk about Obama. We have to blame people that we're very fond of too, like Rahm and David Axelrod. They didn't do a good job in selling that stimulus or the ACA. But I do agree that Biden is doing a better job. James, this is again a recurring question, but it still comes in, and I'm gonna let this person get a pass because all they say is it's T in North Alabama. T, next time, tell us where in North Alabama and what T stands for. Maybe it's just T. He wants to know how Democrats can win more elections in the South. All the state legislatures, governors, all that congressional delegations are full of Republicans. The Southern Democrats need a more conservative approach.
Well, T, I don't know what county you're from, but I do know this. Trump carried whatever county you're from if it's in North Alabama.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure of that.
Yeah.
I don't think we can. It's hard to overestimate the impact of these Georgia Senate races. All right. And it happened. And of course, Georgia is different than Alabama, is different than Louisiana. You have a much higher percentage of college-educated people in Georgia than you do in Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee. All right, they're going to be late coming to the party. But Virginia is now a blue state. I think North Carolina is much further along as a disappointing 2020 in North Carolina, but the underlying shit is still there in North Carolina. All right. The place that we just underperform horribly, honestly, is Florida. It's honestly Florida. 64% in 2018, I never tire pointing this out, voted to give convicted felons who did their time the right to vote. In 2020, 60% voted for a $15 minimum wage. And we lose. And we say that Florida is stupid, all right? Maybe there's something we're doing wrong, because if you're going to put me in an environment where 64% want people to have the right to vote, that convicted felons, or you want a $15 minimum wage, that's an election you should be able to win. That really is. It doesn't inherently tells you that's not a hostile electorate that you're dealing with. There's something wrong with the campaigns that we run, and a lot of it is this. What people, unfortunately, it's what people hear, not what Biden says, but they hear this defund the police, they hear this abolish the police, they hear this communities of color stuff, and they turned off by it. We got to stop it.
One key is to get good candidates, even in a tough environment. In Louisiana, you did that with John Bell Edwards, James. Virginia, part of the reason Virginia changed is demographic, obviously, the Washington suburbs. But when you had Mark Warner, Tim Kaine, Terry McAuliffe, they really produced good candidates. Roy Cooper in North Carolina. So, the South isn't solid anymore. It's a challenge, but it's not solid.
I think the Atlantic South is a much more fertile ground than the Gulf South, or the interior South.
For sure. Francis in Little Rock says, I don't understand why Democrats are reluctant to modify the filibuster before some Democratic senator unexpectedly dies and converts the 50-50 tiebreaker into a Republican majority. Well, first of all, Francis, the filibuster is a huge fight, and I think there are going to be some mild modifications Joe Manchin will go along with, but it's going to be a heck of a struggle. I'm not aware of every state law, but I think in almost every state that's held by a Democrat, the governor gets to appoint the successor. So even in the and hopefully the unlikely event that some Democrat passes from the scene, it may cause a temporary blip, but not much of a problem.
Yeah, I'm nervous about the 2022 thing, as everybody is, and we'll say it's the most consequential off-term election we've had in modern American history, if not us who, if not now, when we stand on the precipice. But it is a pretty big election.
It is. James, I'm more worried about the House and the Senate.
Well, look, these are the headwinds you got. You got to, according to which quant you listen to, you need to win the popular vote somewhere between 4% and 7%.
Yep.
Okay? And the redistricting is going right in the headwinds
Right.
are just are daunting, all right? And you also have just the natural historical thing of the in party generally does terribly in the first go-round. The only thing that gives me hope is I hope Goldman Sachs is right, because there's 8% growth. Probably going to be okay.
There could be.
I don't know if we
there
ever
could
live
be
to 8% growth.
3% unemployment in November of 2022 is a distinct possibility. And I think you had to be encouraged if you watched Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who is not really a radical leftist, last Sunday on 60 Minutes. So I think the economy is going to work well. And I think one of the things Democrats have to do is they have to make sure they're not associated with people like Congressman Tlaib in Michigan. They make sure that the Republicans are associated with the Marjorie Greens. They haven't done that
It's a
very well.
great unanswered question. And if anybody wants to give us some answers and let us, we'll be glad to. Why did we pay a price to lead, and they pay no price for Britain or Bobbitt or whatever? I don't know.
James, Bill in Pittsburgh says, do you see Joe Manchin switching to the Republican Party before the next election?
I kind of don't.
Yeah.
If he's survived in a state that long, he's probably. I think he's actually a Democrat. He may not be the squad's idea what it should be, but I think at its core, he made a decision. Something. I know a lot of Southern Democrats because I am one. Basically, they're Democrats. Or more appropriately, he's not a Republican. If, of course, the Democrat has not carried a county in West Virginia since 2008. And the dumbest people are the people that want to go down there and campaign against him or something. Can somebody just tell these people to shut up and stand down? That guy, the difference between having him or that congressman, that state legislator that showed up in the Capitol building is all the difference in the world. And you got to give this guy some space. He needs maneuver room, but I hope he. I don't think that he will. And it's an amazing politician. He was governor. He did a lot of really progressive,
He did.
forward-looking things, and he's got to get there in his own time. But I think some of this anti-Joe Manchin stuff is like horribly counterproducctive.
You're not going to hear
It
that.
probably helps him. You know what? He probably doesn't care because probably what he needs at home.
You aren't going to hear from Joe Biden or Chuck Schumer. I'll tell you that. I agree. At his core, he's a Democrat. I'd be shocked if he switched. Matthew in Riverside, California, which is right next to James Fallows' hometown of Redlands, wants to know that President Biden is announcing a new deadline of September 11th to pull all troops out of Afghanistan. Is that a mistake? Is he going to be hurt? Let me tell you something. It's a real problem. It's going to cause all kinds of problems. It really is in many ways a very bad decision. There may be only one worse decision, and that is to stay. There is no good outcome here. We've been there for 20 years. The idea that if we stayed for another 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, the situation is going to change, I fear is just unrealistic. And I hate the fact that women are going to suffer. The Taliban's going to take over even more places. I hope that we can prevent it from being a new sanctuary for terrorists, but there are going to be bad consequences. But 20 years is long enough.
Well, Ashraf Ghani, who is the president of Afghanistan, I actually stayed at his house in Kabul. He was like an academic at Berkeley. He's a very gentle guy, but he's losing. I'm afraid that Ashraf, his power is diminishing. The Taliban is coming on. I don't know. And I agree. It's a horrible decision, and the alternative is probably more horrible. But people that cooperated with the U.S., they're going to be in a lot of trouble. I mean, we're embedded there, ingrained now. We paid people off. We had, and when we leave, they're not going to fare. I'm afraid they're not going to fare well. I don't have a better answer.
No.
Is the truth.
I think there are two bad options, two awful
Another
options.
bad option is when the Russians invade the eastern Ukraine, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
They're just going to do it. It's like when they annex Crimea, they're going to do it. What scares the hell out of me is this thing in Taiwan. Oh, God.
Well, the president sent Chris Dodd and Rich Armitage over there. That is literally a high level mission, because you're right. That is incredibly dangerous. And we have a kid who lived with us for a while and has become almost like a daughter, who's Chinese. And we were over there many years ago, and she's not her family's not a member of the party, and she's, wasn't dismissive, but she wasn't, a great party booster. And one night at dinner, we suddenly mentioned Taiwan, and her eyes flashed, and she said, "It's not Taiwan, it's China." That's a widespread feeling throughout that one of national pride.
Biden needs to send 3 people over there: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Yeah, and maybe a couple warships wouldn't hurt either.
No.
But because that is dangerous. We got one more, James. This is from Rob in Rosemont, Pennsylvania. I know Rosemont. Roosevelt had fireside chats. Why doesn't Biden have a weekly tour of America's infrastructure? And for good optics, he could start in West Virginia, move to Alabama, and then Texas.
I don't know if that's such I guess a pandemic probably slows this down a little bit, but I'm not sure that's a bad idea.
No, it's not.
You're selling something, you're pushing it, every place that he goes, he should, which is the easiest thing in the world, is find some shitty piece of infrastructure. So if he's traveling to Scranton for whatever reason, he could accentuate that. Or he's traveling anywhere in the country, he could do that. That's a good idea.
It is.
You should listen to this guy.
Well, that's because he's from Rosemont, Pennsylvania, which used to be the heart of Eisenhower country, that now is voting 60% for Joe Biden.
What county is Rosemont in?
It's Montgomery, I believe. It's the Philadelphia main line.
Right on the main line.
It's become a lot more diverse. And let me just make one point
I
about this.
thought it was in Delaware, but I was wrong. Okay.
Well, yeah, it could be. I mean, the lines get blurred between Delaware, Montgomery, and Chester. They all dress well, though. But the one point I want to make, Biden from the beginning has called this an infrastructure jobs bill. And Republicans are saying only 24% or 7 whatever percent are infrastructure. So let's take everything else out. Okay, fine. I just want someone to ask them every time they say that, every time. The biggest non-roads, bridges, airport element in that bill is $400 billion to provide for help for in-home care for the elderly and people with disabilities. It's a national crisis. The Republicans say that's not a crisis. We don't need that money. It's easy to say, let's take out all the non-infrastructure stuff, but talk about that.
So my sister's semi-retired, RN. She worked for a home health toward the end of her career. She worked for home health, and she would make these visits for like a company that provide that. And if somebody, of course, when you elderly and home health, you generally have diabetes, you have high blood pressure, you have any number of medications, life-saving medications that you don't. If you knock the medication over, you're done. You can't afford a refill. So if you knock your diabetes, your insulin over, you knock your whatever high blood pressure medication you own, you're done. And this is a terrible problem. This is a very good thing that they're doing. I'm an elderly person myself. Obviously, I think of people that have no means, and the strain that this is on families is enormous, and the fact that they want to spend money to help, and this is not just helping the ill elderly people, it's helping their children, it's helping their grandchildren, it's giving, it is part of the infrastructure. and it permeates through generations.
Absolutely. I don't want to hear another Republican say, let's take all the non-infrastructure out and not be asked, do you want to take out this help for people, for in-home care, for seniors and people with disabilities? It's a crucial issue. Okay, keep those letters and emails and cards coming. You all just ask great questions, and you make us think, even if we equivocate on Afghanistan, because there is no good answer.
I'm trying to think in this show as I think back on it. I don't think we talked about Trump more than 5 seconds.
I am so ecstatic that I don't have to listen to him or watch him most days. But then I read something and I just get riled up again. It's only temporary and it goes away. But this week down at Mar-a-Lago, Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, presented Donald Trump with a National Senate Campaign Committee award. It is called the I'm looking for it's the Champion for Freedom Award. Now, if you haven't heard of that, James, you haven't heard of it. There's a reason you haven't heard of it, because it didn't exist. So Rick Scott made it up, and he presented this little small trophy, and he gave it to Donald Trump's little small hands for a great photo opportunity, because he said, Rick Scott said, Trump saved us from democratic socialism. Now, Rick Scott knows something about democratic socialism, because when he was CEO of a healthcare company, they ripped off Medicare and had to pay a $1.7 billion fine. So Rick Scott is well aware of how you can get rich off of socialism.
Well, I guess the really funny thing about the award, it came 2 days after he called Mitch McConnell a dumb son of a bitch. So the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee was so moved by Trump, they presented him a award after he called a leader a dumb son of a bitch. I mean, it's almost, and of course, one of the criteria is that he was hardworking. The guy didn't go into office half the day he was president, but okay, that's fine. It was kind of, I guess my outrage is this whole vaccine hesitancy thing. I mean, these are not like good vaccines. They're awesome. I mean, they were put in, you have to say Trump can take some credit for the Moderna vaccine. All right, you just,
that's right.
Whatever, Congress is going to pass it or whatever. But there's nothing to be hesitant about. I mean, the safety of these things is breathtaking. Now, Johnson & Johnson, they've had 7 million doses, and they've had 6 people get sick. 1 in a million. Try this. Pick a number between 1 and 1 million. If you didn't pick 254,942, you don't win. All right, that's literally how safe these things are. And what's going to happen? We're talking about with Jim and out in Red America and places where I live. One of the disadvantages, we're not going to get to herd immunity if you have that kind of vaccine hesitancy. And it's literally a chance to beat back, one of the great public health crises of our lifetime. And I'm now getting scared we have the tools to do it, and we're going to choose not to do it. And it's terrible. I don't know I have no idea what to say. You're not supposed to scream at people. You're supposed to agree with people. You don't try to argue with them. Okay, but maybe there's just a certain percent of this country, and obviously know some people, they're not like they have the intellectual skills to arrive at a sane decision. They just choose to be crazy. And I don't know what you do to somebody. I don't know how you help someone that just says, I just choose to be nuts. Because there's no valid reason why anyone wouldn't knock a door down to get one of these vaccines. None.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you something, I don't like the big hand of government forcing people to do things, but I have no problem with any private enterprise or any government agency that says, hey, if you want to come work here, if you want to be in the workplace, you have to be vaccinated. You can work from home, we can't fire you, but because you are really jeopardizing other people. And I have no problem with a vaccine passport. We have driver's license. We have, passports. So we're close. We're close to getting back to somewhere, where we used to be. Don't screw it up now.
I scare when I look at these numbers, and I know some people say you need 80% to get herd immunity. Some people say 85. Some people say 76. I don't know, but when you look at the number of hesitant people, it may prevent you from getting to the numbers that you need to get to, and it's a real tragedy to lose lives that are just unnecessary. It doesn't have to be this way.
Right. I couldn't agree more. Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Don't forget to send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. Following this episode, we really would appreciate it if you check out the links to our sponsor, Magic Spoon. We deeply thank you for supporting them. When you do, it helps make this podcast happen. To keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Please rate the show, hopefully with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another program as we continue our War Room planning.